The best way to preserve the house long-term is to keep water away from the foundation. If the unit is older, if it's 5 years, especially once it crosses 10 years, the best thing to do is to service it as soon as you get an opportunity to. At the end of the inspections, when we're walking through, I'll tell them the 5 biggest categories for me are gonna be the roof, the foundation, the HVAC, your plumbing, and then anything pertaining to your electrical.
Well, welcome to the Beyondwealth podcast, the man himself, Spencer. I appreciate you coming in. You are with Sterling Inspections. You do a lot of my seller and buyer inspections, and we've worked with you for a long time. And so there's no other person I wanted in this studio hanging out with me, talking deep diving about inspections than you, man.
Awesome.
Thanks for the time.
Happy to be here. Glad to do it.
You know, we were talking offline. It's really interesting, and I'm super happy for you because, you know, the market has definitely shifted. You know, business is still going for me, but it's slowed down a little bit. I think that's the trend. But you said you're wide open.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting, man. And it shows that your quality of work, that your, you know, connections and just your business is growing in even a market that's kind of slowed down a little bit because, you know, the supply is lower. There's less houses being sold. That is a proven fact.
Absolutely.
So if you're still like steady and like cranking it, it means that your just business has grown.
Yeah,
So that's encouraging.
That's good news. Absolutely.
You're like, I didn't even know it.
Always glad to hear it. Yeah. Yep.
So thanks for coming to the studio. I want to talk through inspections and everything, but tell me a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into this field and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in the Navy for 4 years on active duty. Still am in the reserves, but when I was in before, I did inspections on aircraft. That's kind of what I did. And so when I came out of the Navy and I moved back home, I just merged them together. I already had the construction background, so I put that together with the trained eye, if you will, that I got from the Navy, and then we just been rocking and rolling ever since then.
That's awesome. So you were in construction before you went into the Navy?
That's correct. Just kind of grew up in it.
Okay.
Dad did it, always around it.
Forced to be on the job site, child labor.
Correct. A little bit of that. That's right.
I was looking through my Instagram the other day, and it was my son. We were setting up like some office like equipment, and I know it's not construction, but he's like 4 at the time, and I had him like down there like just cranking on a drill, like. And I was like, how many other 4-year-olds know how to use an impact driver?
Absolutely. It makes a difference because he won't forget it.
No, my dad was a mechanic.
Okay.
And so I grew up kind of wrenching on cars, and he would, you know, he taught me how to thread a bolt. And I mean, you can cross thread some of those fine bolts that are in cars. You can cross thread them pretty easily.
Absolutely.
And I did a few times and learned my lesson. But there is some things to be said for just growing up around mechanical things.
Absolutely.
And when I flip houses, like I use that skill set like all the time.
Yeah, never goes away.
And that's awesome. So do you do any flips yourself, or you just primarily stay in the home inspection space?
Yeah. So what we initially did was we founded this Sterling really as a remodel company. And then we just kind of niched down with home inspections specifically. And then as we grew, we just kind of looked at the offerings that people needed regarding an inspection in general. And so we started branching to do things like sewer scopes and septic tank, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But we've just kind of watched what the market did. And that's how we've taken the cues as to where to grow and what to do. We haven't flipped any. We've built new construction.
Okay.
So we've done that in lieu of that, just kind of starting from the ground up. It's really just using all the tools that we have and being able to apply that to the market.
That's awesome. All right, let's talk about home inspections.
Let's
dig into it. So, you know, when you get or when you put a house under contract, we'll start with the basics.
Right.
You want to know if the systems of the house are good, if there's, you know, some faulty wiring, all these different things. And so oftentimes you can do one of two things. You can hire out a slew of what we would call subcontractors.
That's
you
right.
can hire an electrician. You can hire a roofer. You can hire, you know, just a general maintenance like a GC guy, and you can hire a plumber, and they can inspect all of these specific parts of the house. Well, not only is that expensive, but it's time consuming, and that's where you come in. You are a home inspector, and effectively you inspect all the systems of the house and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is my general knowledge. And then there are certain cases, I think, where we've talked about where there may be a system that you're like, hey, you need to dive deeper. I see some foundation issues. You need to go to a foundation specialist. So talk me through basically the systems in the house that you like to look at. What are some of the majors, minors, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So when people call and they ask usually what's covered during the home inspection, what I tell them is it's easier to tell you what's not covered. So broadly speaking, we're going to start at the roof and make our way down to the foundation and cover everything subsequently in between. And so that includes mechanical systems of the home, like you mentioned, electrical, heating and cooling, water heater, kitchen appliances in almost all cases, unless they're really specialty or something that's just I'm not familiar with, and doors, walls, windows, the whole nine. So I always tell people at the end of the inspections when we're walking through, I'll tell them the 5 biggest categories for me are going to be the roof, the foundation, the HVAC, your plumbing, and then anything pertaining to your electrical. And you can kind of use those as a jumping off point to get to the big picture. If you have an issue with one of those systems, it's usually going to take priority over everything else. So if those 5 systems check out, everything at this point is going to be, in most cases, relatively minor. You could chalk it up to simply home ownership, or what you might just say is maintenance.
Yeah, it is interesting because there's a lot of houses where the maintenance is just slightly dilapidated, and those houses, don't sell as well. But oftentimes those maintenance things are pretty minor.
They are.
Like this room could be painted because there's a lot of scuffs on the wall. That's right. It just turns off these buyers, but for all you know, the whole plumbing system could have been redone.
That's right.
2 years ago, which is the major expense. Paint costs, $35 a gallon. Yep. And an afternoon's worth of work.
That's right. And the value is when people walk through and they see those rooms that need to be painted and the deck boards that are worn and door casings that are rotten, it can turn people off to that. When those things are, just like you said there, I mean, those are weekend fixes in most cases. And so some people, it costs them money off the sales price. It makes buyers pass and walk on it. And yet the whole time, these are not large enough concerns to really back out of.
Yeah. I'm working on a flip, partnered with Joe, and we basically, it's a burnout. So per code and getting the electrical back on, because the electrical was like completely cut off because they had to, flood place with water.
Absolutely.
You have to rip out all the drywall. So we're down to sticks, right? Okay. And then we've been rebuilding it back. We've got drywall back and all that. But effectively, walls in, it's a brand new house. I mean, new windows, new electrical, like new HVAC, brand new drywall, like whole new kitchen, and it's just so interesting because, people are going to see what looks like a probably higher end flip of a house. That's but right. Like when you actually, and what I'm going to have to do is market it and be like, these systems literally are brand new.
That's right.
And I think we'll get a premium for it, but not every buyer, I think, is going to realize the value of effectively they're buying almost a brand new house.
That's right.
In a neighborhood has a little bit of character and stuff. So those things are expensive. So let's go down the kind of the list of those Absolutely. 5.
Let's do it.
Break down the roof and kind of what you typically see as issues, and that would kind of include the soffits and gutters and all that. But even soffits are pretty repairable and stuff. So what are the biggest issues you're seeing with roofs and the things to be careful of or be aware of?
So the age is by far the biggest thing. There's usually not a lot of maintenance that goes into the roof. Typically, you put the roof on and the roof stays there just like it is for years on end. Metal roofs are a little bit different because they have screws. As you know, those screws tend to work themselves loose over time, and then water can get down in those screws and then cause leaks in the attic. So metal roofs are a little bit more effort. They're not just kind of set it and forget it like you would have on a composite shingle. But for me, when we get on the roof, the first thing I want to know is what the granular on those shingles look like, because that's going to tell the story, in other words. That's going to tell you about how old the roof is, how long it's got left, and you really can't hide it. There's no way to look at the roof and say, it's 8.5 years old. But you can look at it and say, the shingles are darkened. That's pretty consistent with age. The granulars are holding tight. That means it's also pretty consistent with its age. We don't have shingles rising up along the edges. All these things mean, it's not 20 years old, because if it were, you'd have shingles that are missing. You'd have granular that are missing. And so you can kind of say it's probably 10 to 12 years old based on this. And then based on the type of shingle, you want to know how much longer do you have left, right? So if this is a 30-year roof, I'll tell people, you're not going to get 30 years. If you ride it to 30 years, you're going to need one badly.
You're one lucky dude.
You will have buckets, trying to catch water. But you can comfortably usually get a few years out from that. So you might get 25 out of a 30-year roof, or somewhere in that ballpark.
Why do they say it's a 30-year roof then?
When they put, so I think that's the
marketing.
No, well, in part, yeah.
That's so interesting. So I know that there's 3-tab, which is what they say that's a 25, right?
You're correct.
Or 20.
2025.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the dimensional, which is 30.
Correct.
30 year. Is there anything over that? I don't think there is there?
So you start to get into clay and other kind of tiles, and you can extend it. But as far as the composite shingles are concerned, those architectural styles are kind of like the gold standard.
Does the metal roof work itself, those screws, do they work itself just from the heat expansion and contraction of the wood that it's anchored into?
I believe that contributes to it.
Yeah.
Certainly. And then sometimes they're never anchored down completely to begin with. And so even walking on new ones, you'll see ones that haven't been. I guess from the perspective of whoever's doing it, if you just get on top of a metal roof and you count those screws, I mean, they're innumerable, right? So if one gets missed, it's understandable. But you want to make sure those stay tightened down just so you don't have those issues. Yeah.
That's interesting. So roofs basically, and I would say, an estimate that I've seen, and, when I was flipping 5-6 years ago, you could get a roof for like $4K, like from, like a bottom dollar, like really basic roof from going directly to the crew. But now I think we're in the 8,000 to 9,000 range for basic 3.2. That's 1,500 square foot. I mean, it's climbed significantly. The cost of materials is just
right, and that assumes
are expanded greatly.
Yeah, with inflation and everything, and that assumes also that your roof is not. It's a standard, right? It's not a basic, or it is a basic rather. It doesn't have any kind of odd cuts to it, and
or extreme like slopes,
that too,
like extreme slopes. They charge extra.
That's correct, because they're hanging off the side trying to put those things on.
How do you when it's like a really big slope? Are you just getting up on a ladder and just kind of peeking and looking? You're not like climbing up and down that roof, or
I will climb more than most, but that's because I can still, right? So I won't be able to do that always. But other than that, it would be putting it up on a ladder to be able to see it and really put hands on it. Because sometimes just rubbing your hand across it can tell a lot about it.
I've always thought it, and I get it because, the roofing, we can dive into it. But oftentimes I get asked by the buyers of some of the properties, they're like, what's the age on the roof? And I'm like, I have no clue. Mm-hmm. And I would say a significant amount of the sub 200K range homes in Birmingham, they just get roofs thrown on. There's no like registry for like, a central place where these roofers have to go and say, hey, I put a roof on this property. It was inspected by this person and this is the date. And then insurance companies or the owners can go back. Like it's kind of the Wild West a little bit.
It is. That's a good way to put it.
There's a lot of roofing companies out there. Some are quality, some are not. Some stand behind their work. Like it's one of those things you really have to be careful with and making sure you get a good roofer. But on the flip side, there's a little smoke and mirrors because you can get what feels like a very reputable company. And all of these companies effectively are using these roofing crews. But so they just hire them out. The front face, that's one thing I didn't know at first. Like the front face of these companies, they're just subbing out the actual work.
Absolutely.
And then they're guaranteeing it, or maybe they, feel better about the product they're ordering for these roofers to put on and stuff like that. So I've found the best pricing by going directly to the crews.
Yeah, for sure.
Getting it done, and then just realizing that, like, I make sure that I know the materials they're ordering, or you realize that, like, I'm taking a little bit of risk. I'm getting maybe a $2,000 discount on my install, but I may be putting a roof on in 15 years instead of 25.
That's correct.
And that's a risk you take.
Absolutely. It comes with a big cost difference too, though, just like you mentioned. So it could be warranted.
Yeah.
I would say in some cases. I get a lot of callbacks on, we just had a new roof put in. I don't think that it looks like it should. Can you come look at it? I don't get that with electrical, plumbing, HVAC, windows, but the roof tends to be that's where they come from.
Yeah.
So it is just like the Wild West. You're pulling permits, to do electrical work and plumbing work and all that, and you can trace it back, and people can usually find receipts for those. The roof is usually just, especially if people don't stay put. So a lot of people don't stay put. People are moving, I feel like, more frequently.
I would agree.
I did an inspection yesterday on a house that the agent said, you did this one in 2020. And I looked around and I thought, I don't think I've ever been in this house before. Turns out I had. I did do it.
You do a lot of houses,
that's right.
so
and
to your credit.
I thought, I don't remember this. And usually I'm pretty good at it. And so people are moving more frequently, and you'll get somebody who's in the house and you'll ask them to try to probe and get information, especially if the roof's kind of iffy, and they'll say, oh, we moved in last year and the previous sellers didn't know. So you're working from scratch. You're having to build a model of what you think or how old you think it is based on just the factors, and you don't have anything else as far as history is concerned to go off of.
Yeah, so you're just taking gauges and saying this looks like a 10-year, this looks like a 5-year, and you give a window, and that's the best you can do.
That's right. Yep. So, and is it leaking? I mean, is there water in my attic? That's the other. It's the gold standard there.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to say to all these systems, I would say that if it was an issue, I would say, it's probably about $5,000. Mm-hmm. But since COVID and price climbs and material costs and labor costs, I'm like, it's probably about $10,000 now. Yeah. For a basic 3.2.
Right.
Pretty much all of these systems can be maybe a little more, maybe a little less.
That's right.
But I would say that if you have an issue in this pocket, $10,000 is a good place to start and work one way or the other on it. So unless it gets a foundation, that can get kind of insane.
That's a good down. All right. That's a good down payment.
Let's talk about foundations.
All right.
So we went all the way from the top, all the way to the bottom.
That's right.
Foundation, in my opinion, I've walked several properties with my buyers, and given my background of flipping and, working on, I was never in the construction world, but I can look at a foundation and say, hey, we have potential issues or clear issues, or this is looking pretty solid. Let's make sure. But in my opinion, out of these 5, I would probably put it as fundamentally the most important of all these systems because of the cost to repair.
That's right.
What are your thoughts?
I completely agree. In most cases, especially here, it's not just flat. I mean, we have our share of slab homes, but most of them are basements and crawl spaces. Especially,
you would love to be inspector just out in Nevada, or I don't know, wherever it's flat.
It must be nice.
Montgomery's pretty flat.
It is. I don't think I've ever seen a crawl space down there, to be honest.
Oh man,
it seems like it's all slab.
You're like, you guys have it easy down there.
They do. I mean, because if you have an issue on the slab house, you can usually see it, right? It's until you can't. But sometimes you can feel it in the floor. You don't have as many indicators. Crawl space, it will tell the story, and so will the basement wall. For example, but because so many of them are underground to some capacity, when you talk about a cost for a foundation, it's going to be, it supersedes the others. If you have a major issue on the roof or the HVAC or the electrical or the foundation's going to win almost every time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen quotes, exceed $30,000-$40,000, and up. It really depends on, how much work has to be done. And in some of those cases, the work doesn't justify the cost of the house because of the location. There was one house they were trying to wholesale in Homewood. And to be honest, the lot itself was so slanted that I just don't think the lot was even worth it to be, even Homewood being super expensive. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you, man, this front, it was such a slanted lot, and the basement was completely underground. And so the front face of this house was literally holding up this very extreme slope. And bro, the wall literally you could see was probably from the base to the top was probably a foot and a half difference. And you would see in the door jambs, like they had shifted. Like the bathroom wouldn't even close because the door jambs. And that's a really good place to see shifts is indoors. That's what I learned a lot of times. They'll be off a little bit, and that's from the pressure of these shifts. So
I tell people that often, that you're looking for movement. So do you have a foundation concern? Because the first thing people ask me is, what about the roof? And the second thing is, what about the foundation? And I always tell them that just that you're looking for some type of indication of movement. So let's say they have a finished basement, and so it's all drywall down there, and you can't see the block or you can't see the poured concrete. So what are you looking for? Is there any movement on this wall above you or around you that would indicate some type of shift? Do we have cracks over doors and windows? And not hairline or drywall cracks, but we're talking about some type of a significant shift. Do the doors not close properly, and you can tell that there's a gap right at the top? Like that doesn't. That's
they've sawed them down so they do close.
The door is not level. That's right. Yeah, it takes a dive off the end. You're like, I don't think that's right.
Man.
And then windows, which would be vinyl, double pane vinyl, which should slide up and down as smooth as they can. They jam halfway up, and you're like, that shouldn't be doing that. Those are indications that something below you has probably shifted. It may be a failed footer or something along those lines. So you're trying to pick off anything you can to see, you may have something to investigate further. There are other times where it's just, I can think on one occasion where I got to the house. I was walking around with the gentleman. It was a vacant house. It was somewhere here in Vestavia. I'd have to go back and find it. And I remember walking around and looking at the back of the house and the sides. And the gentleman was inside, and I went and tracked him down, and I said, this has got foundation problems like you would not imagine. I mean, I'll do the inspection I'm happy to, but you're going to have to bring a foundation guy out here. And he was really pressing on what would it cost? Would it cost $50,000? And I'm like, and I don't give prices because I don't know in most cases, especially labor rates and what they charge and what their crew charges. But in that case, $50,000 was gonna get him in the door, but it probably wasn't gonna tackle it. And so we called it right there. And so he said, I appreciate you letting me know. I'll call you on the next one. I walked away. He walked away. It was all good. And I came back on that house about 6 months later. And it had been fixed, but it had been really caulked is really what they had done. And so all these massive shifts, and I'm talking about like, you think about a step crack, but that step crack was an inch in thickness or more. The wall that was underground had a large horizontal crack in it. And instead of fixing it, they caulk it and they seal it and they kind of paint over it. And it's like, that's even worse because now you're just trying to skirt the issue that's actually there. And I don't know what came of it after all of that, but it's either you can't see it and you're having to make some type of a guess, or it's so blatant that you really don't need me to tell you that you got an issue there.
Yeah, and I think that's the great thing about having an inspector at the end of the day is like you're there to say, hey, this is probably good, or this is overall good, or this needs to be further investigated.
That's right.
And I've had houses where you're like, hey, overall foundation's good. There's this one spot. You can get someone out, or you can just shore it up with one pylon, and you're going to be good to go. You're not an expert. You can't say for sure that's going to be the fix, but you've seen enough houses that you're like, you're probably good.
That's right.
And I've seen that too. So you have the whole exterior wall. Then I've seen houses where you got rolling floors. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that's not an exterior wall issue, that's interior supports. And more often than not that I've seen it is from moisture in the crawl space that weakens the joists, and then the supports that were sufficient enough are no longer sufficient because they're porous, and wood is porous last time I heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just not as strong. So
Correct.
the interior, not the exterior wall. The exterior wall could be like literally a crawl space with a maybe 3 or 4 foot block, not major wall, nothing, no water intrusion, like pressure from like dirt basically.
That's right.
So it's totally like fine there, but the interior is just straight up jacked because of that issue of moisture just sitting. And that happens a lot on the flat lots, I've noticed. And so when I talk with my buyers, I say, we have water here in Birmingham. We get sometimes major, rains come through. How water gets on and how water gets off your property is almost just as important as, other things of the foundation, because it's the longevity of that moisture and all that. So talk me through some of the non-exterior foundation water issues that you've seen.
When I was talking to Jordan, he made mention of the vapor barrier, and sometimes it seems like when you come back after the inspection and you're looking at all the things that need to be done, for me, in a crawl space, when you don't have a vapor barrier down, and that's just basically it's the plastic that you see that just sits on the dirt in the crawl space, right? Covers the floor.
Yeah.
Something so basic to me is always a red flag. I always highlight that and say that's critical. It needs to be in there. And so some people will look at that and go, how much is that vapor barrier going to cost? I don't know, maybe $100 and a Saturday to roll it out on the floor and tape it to the edges. It seems like it's so minimal. Why is that so critical? But moisture is that number one thing that will damage the foundation or deteriorate the foundation. The best way to preserve the house long term is to keep water away from the foundation. And so with that vapor barrier, moisture is rising up continuously from the ground. And that moisture goes somewhere. I mean, it evaporates, a lot of it, but a lot of it will condense. And so you'll see on the underside of the decking, in a lot of cases, mildew, you'll see mold, you'll see all of this kind of stuff because you're not doing anything with moisture. You're not containing it. You're just allowing it to basically run rampant. That $100 barrier plastic just tapers it, dampens it, and keeps everything below it so that moisture doesn't have free reign in the crawl space. So when it's left unchecked, you do have that, just like you mentioned, block is porous, it'll soak up water, and you'll have these block supports or these wood supports that were put in the 70s, and they were excellent. But time, really, which is your enemy here, over time, the ground kind of gives way a little bit, everything tends to settle, and so you'll have support posts that at one point in time were in great contact with the joist and with their pad underneath, and they're not even in contact anymore, or you can wiggle them, they've shifted.
Yeah.
All that is as a result of moisture. If you control moisture and if you take that into account, then that is, you are 90% there. Outside of that, it's going to take some kind of almost an exterior movement to cause those supports, especially when they're blocked, to move or to be adjusted. You're going to have to drive into them. You're going to have to hit them. You're going to have to do something to them. Stopping moisture is the number one thing. That is where to start, and in most cases where to end.
Yeah. And I've noticed too, going back to the moisture barrier, it is good, but you also have to fix the exterior, the moisture getting into the crawl space. And so I had a house under contract actually in West Homewood, and really excited about it. Got it, for a pretty decent deal under contract. And I go there, and the day of the inspection, it was pouring rain. And I actually love that now. I know now, I hope for a rainy day on my inspection day because it's going to show all of the issues. And effectively, the front of the lot and the back of the lot went just teed right into the back of the house.
That's right.
And there was 6. So on the front side of thing, I want to back up before I say this. There was a moisture barrier.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this is great. It was one of the ones that was like professionally installed, which cost a lot more than $100.
And encapsulation.
Yeah, encapsulation.
Oh,
they full on paid a high-end company to go in and like encapsulate the crawl space.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, this is great, And so I found out why. Well, because the lot literally, came to a T at the back of the house. There was about 6 inches of standing water at the back of the house when it was pouring. And so, I talked with a guy who I'd been working with a lot, and he was like, don't buy this house. He's like, because oftentimes, you can change a house, you can fix it, but you can't change the land. You would have to regrade that lot completely, basically to go to a pit that would be some kind of like well for like all of this water to like funnel to, and then you would have to sump pump it out to the street.
Yeah. So when you're in those crawl spaces and you're looking around, the sides of it will also give you an indication of what's happening on the outside.
Yeah.
So this is called efflorescence. It's basically where you take a new cinder block that you would buy. It's a very light colored gray, but it will darken if it gets wet. And the reason for that is because when it does, the salt deposits get pulled through that block and it stains the outside. So when you're looking and you see that stain, you know that water has at least gotten to the outside walls and bled through over time.
Yeah.
So that's a starting point for you to then say, what do we need to do to mitigate at this point in time to keep water away from the walls? In most cases, you can just regrade the slope from the outside so that all your water has a negative fall away from the house,
right,
not towards it. Sometimes that's sufficient. Gutters need to stay cleaned. They need to be routed away. All the water needs to exit, just like you mentioned before, away from the house as best it can. If that doesn't suffice, then a sump pump tends to be about your only means. The issue is that not only does water come in from the outside, and this is especially the case with basement homes that are, 6, 7, 8 feet underground. You're not worried about it coming in from the top. It's going to do that to some degree, but it's groundwater rising up from underneath.
Yeah.
How do you stop that? Effectively, you can't stop that. I mean, you can't stop the water the ground from producing water. It won't happen. So you'll put in these sump pumps, and that will basically channel the water and redirect it so that when it comes in, inevitably, you have a means of getting it out. And so a lot of foundation companies have hit on that really well, and that's why you'll go in these homes that are underground and you'll see the concrete up next to the wall is a different color. It's a light gray, whereas the rest of the slab floor is a dark gray. And you're like, they did some work there. And they did. They drilled down. They put a drain pipe on the foundation wall to collect that water. They channel it to a sump pump. That sump pump pumps it to the outside. And you've effectively, as best you can, you've handled your groundwater problem. So you're stopping it from the outside. You're doing your best to kind of taper it on the inside. And that tends to be an ongoing battle. Encapsulation is usually about your best option, but it's not foolproof.
Yeah.
And it also it's not cheap.
No.
I mean, you're going to be up there.
Yeah. It is an interesting thing, but foundations, and it just goes back to having someone on the front end inspect the property, and real estate effectively is the land. Like, you put a building on that real estate, but real estate is the land. You can't change that land. That's what you are buying, and you happen to have a house on it too.
That's right. That's correct.
And that's an expensive house, and it's full of finishes, and it's where you live.
Yeah.
But you can tear that house down and rebuild. But you can't, I mean, unless you bring in some major regrading, and even the regrading, you would have to get permits and stuff because how you grade would affect your neighbors, and that has to be qualified and improved. And so it's complex. So that's when I'm always looking. I'm always like saying, let's look at the land first. I know it's not the shiny countertops and it's not the sexiest thing to look at, but like how does the land lay? How does water get on and off? What pressure points do you have? And then hopefully helping my buyers make the best choice.
That's right. Showing them what they're working with.
All right, let's talk about HVACs because we live in the South.
We do.
And it is hot.
All the time.
And humid. And we are also in there's SEER levels, and our requirement is the highest of efficiency, and that's my understanding is that SEER is the efficiency level, correct?
Correct. It encompasses.
Yeah, and so when we have HVACs put in, we're getting the most expensive of the most expensive required parameters for these HVACs. I mean, we have to have the high-end stuff down here in the South. So when one's not going well, when one's kind of on its last leg, we need to know about it. Talk about some of the issues with the HVACs.
This is that thing that I usually will tell people when you move in here. And something's going to go wrong because, it's not going to be pristine and perfect forever. It's probably going to be that HVAC unit that goes out. The biggest thing for us as home inspectors on this is to make sure everything is running efficiently and running properly like it should be. Not necessarily to grade the efficiency and say, oh, it's meeting some kind of a standard, not like you would have for your HVAC contractor. But is it doing its job? So it kind of gets back to, and this is a good example on the HVAC of what the home inspection is. It's an evaluation of the systems of the home in a snapshot in time from the perspective of a generalist who's saying, what are we working with? It's not a code inspection. So we're not going in and saying this doesn't meet code, that doesn't meet code. The only person who can do a code inspection is a code inspector, right? It's the city who can come in there and do that. You pull a permit, you got to have a code inspector come out, and then he's going to make you adhere things to code. From the home inspection, think about the 1970s home. It doesn't meet modern code.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to meet modern code. What it needs to do is it needs to meet a standard of safety and then also practicality. So if the HVAC unit's not working, again, you don't need me for that, but I would tell you, you should probably get that fixed, right? You should probably get that checked out. So for me, it's going to be, are the systems in good condition? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Is it cooling in the house? Do the register temperatures match what they should be? Is there any spots where maybe it's not blowing air whereas it should be? Is there anything that is blatantly wrong? Or do we have a gas furnace that is venting into an attic?
Yeah.
Yes, we do unfortunately have those. Do we have compressors that are at the outside that are so tilted, right, that they're leaning to the side? Something like that can shorten the motor of it. So it's making sure all those things are in place. And then the age here is very important on the unit because we want to know about how long we've got left.
Yeah. Okay, so you're not putting, an HVAC tech will break apart the system, clean it, and put gauges on, the pressure of the what's the word I'm looking for?
So so their gauges are gonna run to test things like freon levels.
Yeah, freon. Yeah.
They're looking at the suction line. I mean, they're it's a deep dive.
They're doing a deep dive. You are looking at, there is a difference of the temperature between where it starts and the output.
That's right.
Of that. So where's the house at now? Where's the outputs? Or is there a gauge of that difference that is in good parameter and then where it's not? What is that difference?
It's subjective.
Okay.
It's just, when I walk in and it's cold, in some sense, if I make it colder, can I prove that at the register?
Right.
That I made it colder. And same thing with the heat. So we'll use things like infrared cameras, but the thing about the infrared camera is it's going to register or measure, I should say, the temperature of the register cover itself.
Right.
So I can pull those off and kind of measure the air directly in there. But we just want to have some type of a consistency.
Yeah.
I did one about a month ago where I turned the AC on and it got hot, and I turned the heat on and the HVAC cooling kicked on. I've never seen that. I'm not even sure how someone managed to do that.
They just mixed up the wires.
They did. So, I mean, something like that, right? Again, it's like There's
a note on top that says, think backwards.
That's right. Yeah, it's just 101 stuff there. Yeah, absolutely.
You're like, unit works, it's just opposite. So do what that with you will.
That's correct. That's correct.
And then, like not all HVACs are created equal in the sense of the routing of the airflow. Mm-hmm. My house included. So these houses that were built in the 50s, 40s, were not built with HVAC already in. Mm-hmm. And so my house was, I think it's 57 is my house. I live in Homewood, have a house built in 57. And so, and it's a tri-level. Mm. And so the top is usually a couple degrees toastier than the middle. And then the basement's the coolest.
It's cold, I'm sure.
And then I actually have a room that's not vented at all. And so that's hot unless I open the door, and then I kind of get, so it's just kind of this hodgepodge. Now I could spend probably a significant amount of money and really get it reworked, and I might have to lose some walls and for routing or just deal with it. But those, like you said, the level of like how much air output is pushing to my upstairs versus downstairs, it probably would not get the best inspection.
I can imagine.
Thumbs up.
I can imagine. Yeah, they usually don't.
But but there's certain things where I was just like, it's working.
That's right.
And I live in a 1950s house. Do I want this house in the middle of the city? Yes or no? For this price? Mm-hmm. Yes or no? If I wanted a new build with perfect like output of air to each vent and insulation and all that, well, I'd have to go to a new build where HVACs are now accounted for in the build. So when you're inspecting, are you effectively just gauging a little bit of that house age and saying like, hey, for a lot of these 50s houses, this HVAC is blowing strong. You're as good as you're going to get, basically. Like, right. What is the variable there that you're communicating?
Yeah, that takes a lot into consideration, is when it was built, because that's going to determine how they run ducts, where they place them, and that's so there's a gulf between that and new construction. And I will often move from an old house like that, 1930s, to new construction, and you can just see it immediately there.
Yeah,
it is in the output. You can feel that the air is just it's trickling out of those vents. But oftentimes, when you're playing in that neighborhood, and when you're dealing with homes of that age and also at that price point, your question to me as the buyer is always, is it doing its job? Is it providing cool air to the room?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes in those cases, then that's the bottom line. That's what you need to know. But it could be in some cases where you go in a crawl space and the duct has partially disconnected. So it's falling. So half of your cold air is going into the crawl space and you're never feeling it.
Yeah.
So it's that also. Is it doing its job, but is it being hampered from doing its job because of something like age, or the duct's not insulated?
Yeah.
That could be a lot, because they're condensing, they're sweating, they're dripping. If you just keep them insulated, that'll go a long way towards making sure that you got a good airflow there.
Yeah.
Then your airflow will be colder, and it won't matter that it's not producing at such a high rate because the air's colder. And so something so small can make such a difference like that. So in almost all cases, the general advice would be, unless you have what is basically a new unit, if the unit is older, if it's 5 years, especially once it crosses 10 years, the best thing to do is to service it as soon as you get an opportunity to, because of those things that I can't see. The Freon levels need to be known. The heating chamber, and you think about the coils and you think about the inside of the furnace, that heating chamber can't be seen without specialized equipment. I can't see it. You can't see it unless you walk up and you have the tools to do it. It could have a crack in that heating chamber, and I could pass it on a home inspection, or any other home inspector could pass it and say it's good, and nobody would ever know the better for it.
Yeah.
So for the cost of servicing an HVAC unit, and what would you say you're running across?
Yeah, it's about $175.
That's right. Know? The guy that comes and services mine, I pay $150 annually. He comes out twice a year.
Yeah.
Right. And that's for both visits. It's just, it's even a fraction of the cost of the inspection to have somebody spend, 30 minutes out there going through it and running those gauges and saying, no, it actually turns out that it's okay.
Yeah.
And then from there, more than any other system of the house, it's maintenance. It needs to stay serviced. It needs to be maintained. You need every January or every June to say, I need to get the unit checked out again. It's time.
Yeah.
Because it's a costly system. And that is one of those things you want to ride until it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. It's one of those, to be honest, like roof, foundation, electrical and plumbing, I am 100% on board with getting like a guy like you. I always tell my buyers, I say, let's get an actual HVAC guy out there to put the gauges on the Freon, to look at the heating units, to they do a general cleaning inspection.
That's right.
And to me, it's like one of those units that the cost is so high. And like you said, it's one of the systems that will fail. I'd rather spend a few extra, an extra $100, $150 to have them thoroughly go through that specific system. Because I've seen that beneficial in the negotiations. I've gotten HVACs before because of that. So,
absolutely.
But you're a good gauge for like, hey, are we even close? Or is this, 2 years old? You're going to probably be good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is like, what are you? So big picture here, like what are you paying for when you buy the home inspection? It's not really peace of mind. It's really, what am I getting into? But what you're hiring is essentially my experience of looking at these systems, for hundreds and hundreds and then thousands and thousands of homes. So a lot of the times, it's subconscious. I just will pick stuff up that I'm not thinking. It looks out of the ordinary. It shouldn't look like that. I just know that ought not look like that, right? And so you're paying for somebody to go or somebody to effectively say that unit is not. It shouldn't be doing what it's doing right now. It either is not cooling efficiently, or it's not providing like it should be, and that's enough to say somebody needs to come in and have a look at it. And it's not just with the HVA. That's the same thing with the electrical. That looks like a sketchy hook up there. You should probably have somebody look at that.
Yeah.
And so those mechanical systems, more than the others, are where I would say your plumber, your electrician, and your HVAC guy are going to be brought in more than anybody else.
Yeah.
Those systems need to be. They need to be on point. They don't need to. You don't need to play around with those because your repairs will be
substantial.
They will be. Yeah.
All right, let's. We're staying cool. We got the water off our heads
and away from our feet.
Away from our feet. We wanted the lights to turn on.
Okay.
So we're into electrical. I think a lot of times there's a safety concern when I'm working through negotiations on the repair addendums. Electrical, hands down, freaks people out because they hear electrical fire and they hear fire and it's just like, oh no. And it is a safety issue. Don't get me wrong. But talk me through some of the stuff you're seeing in the electrical space, why it is important, what some stuff is some people think is super important and is really actually not that big of a deal, and the stuff that may be minor, they think is minor is actually significant. So
the big things that we have here in Birmingham, especially when you're in the city, so you're around these older homes, would be like knob and tube wiring, if you've seen that. So it's the old ungrounded wiring system that they used to put in these houses. Knob and tube is one of those things where it's like, it's dated, it's old, it's been here a long time. I don't know that I would fully trust this system right here. And it becomes the same way when you have fuse boxes, where you gotta, you blow a fuse and you gotta screw a new one in, right?
Fuse, yeah.
Or if you have aluminum wiring, which we see a lot of the time still in some of these panels here. Those three things right there are the that and then recalled panels. So we'll call it four things there.
Yeah.
Are those that would say to me, I would think I'm not going to put my family here with these things in this kind of condition right there. So those items are going to be the most costly because you're going to end up having to, on knob and tube, that's going to be a rewire to some degree. Yeah. Aluminum wiring most certainly will be for those wires that are aluminum. Recalled panels, just that tells the whole story. The panels are no longer, the companies don't exist in many cases who made those panels. So any one of those things that you walk in and you see is enough to say, I'm going to have to take this back to the seller and renegotiate because this is going to be probably a priority system here. So any one of those that you want to deep dive into, we can, as far as aluminum wiring or fuse panels or knob and tube. But just by walking in and seeing it, that should trigger an alert to go,
it's just
I'm going to have to do
something.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong. And if you touch a system, you have to get it up to code. And so when you say you have a panel that's bad, now you can just rewire just the exterior, say the exterior panel is bad. You can just do that. But oftentimes, if you pull permit, you're going to have to just rewire the whole house.
That's correct.
And sometimes the cost of jury rigging will say of only covering we'll say that a small part of that issue. Mm-hmm. It's so insignificant to just getting it done fully and done right. It's just like, just do it. Mm-hmm. And I would say rewires of houses, usually I get done for about $10K, 11. Wires starting to get real expensive.
Yeah, it is. That copper, yeah.
That copper. And so, but that said, like most of the time when these issues come up specifically with knob and tube, it's just like, well, we need a full rewire. Mm-hmm. And that's the cost of it, because you could just get the sections that are like knob and tube, and you're still going to be out for $5K. So you might as well just do the whole thing.
And some people do that. You'll go, you'll see, like, you talk about these 3-story houses. So you'll have the basement level that's good, it's been rewired. Main level's been rewired. You get to the attic, it's still hanging on knob and tube. And the house has been there 115 years, and you're like, I have a responsibility to let you know that it's there. You can choose to leave it. And the seller's probably going to say it's been there that way since we bought it 10 years ago. It's been great. Okay, that's fine. Some of this stuff is not necessarily me coming in and saying this needs to be done and you just doing it. My report is just a guide to show you what you're about to get into.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable with that and that doesn't bother you, for example, and you say, no, I'm good. I'm going to leave the knob and tube here. By all means, you have every right to do so. It's an ungrounded system. So squirrels would chew through those wires, and it just poses a risk there that you need to be ready to handle.
Yeah.
Should it come up.
Fully aware. So when it comes to the electrical, talk about GFCIs and the grounding issue. When houses are not grounded, you can throw in a GFCI, we'll say in a kitchen or whatever. It's a solution, but it's not necessarily the full solution, if that makes sense.
That's
so talk about why that's often a proposed, hey, put GFC, that's what I get back a lot, GFCIs in the bathroom and kitchen.
That's right. And they need to be there. Per a modern code, you're going to require that they be there for any wet location, outside, bathrooms, kitchens, things like that. You can go to Lowe's and just buy a GFCI and just come home and just stick it in. You can do that. And the unsuspecting buyer would walk by and never know a difference. If they do know anything at all, they would go, oh yeah, it's got one of those little buttons on it like mine has at home. And so you would just presume everything is good to go. It's such a small thing. I mean, those outlets, they could cost $15, $20, $25. But what they provide or what they protect you against is essentially it will save your life. Those GFCIs measure current coming in and going out. That's what they do. That's a constant sensor on that. If it notices that the current going in does not match the current going out, it will trip the outlet before you get shocked. So if you think about a hairdryer or anything that you've got and you drop it in water, usually you would get shocked. It will trip itself before you get shocked. That's how fast they are.
Yeah.
And think about kids around water, and it's just they're so good to have, but you got to do them the right way, just like you mentioned. You can't take just an ungrounded outlet and stick a GFCI on there and say it's good, because if I come along with a receptacle tester and I just plug it in, it's going to tell me this is still an open grounded outlet. So when it comes to those things in these older houses, it's good to have an electrician go back and properly ground these things. The house needs to be grounded to begin with. That should go without saying. But beyond that, those critical areas like that are where it would almost be required. And if you do pull any type of an electrical permit, I promise you they'll mandate that you do that.
Yeah, some people think that is fixing the ground, and it's not.
Yep.
But it will still trip, correct?
In some cases it will.
But in other cases it won't, because it's not
right.
grounded.
That's correct. And so that's the problem. I mean, you're relying on it when it gets to that point. You expect to be able to rely on things.
Yeah.
It's like smoke alarms. I'll go in and the smoke alarm it's yellow. Right? It wasn't yellow when it was put in, but it's yellow now because it's been there for 45 years. Yeah. I'm not going to let my child sleep anywhere near that and let that be the one it's dependent upon, because I don't know that it's going to work when I need it to if there's a fire.
And code with, speaking of fire alarms, code has changed. Those have to be wired in now. And also have battery backups.
Mm-hmm. And the difference
there,
you
used to only just have to have battery.
Correct. And now they require them to be in bedrooms, hallways, whereas in the older houses, even in the 70s and 80s, you might find one in a hallway, right? And you've got a gas furnace and a gas water heater underneath you, right? And you just got that one lone one on the wall. I mean, it takes multiple points of failure, right?
Yeah.
It's a common military thing there.
Yeah.
It's just you need to be able to rely on multiple systems and not just that one to save your life, especially when it comes to carbon monoxide and things like that.
Yeah. What other, before we move on from electrical, what else are you seeing and stuff that you point out oftentimes, or issues with electrical that are coming up?
So the aluminum wiring is a really common one. I ran into a good bit of that already this week, and I've had a few people that I've had to go back and have that conversation with. So in these older houses, these people used aluminum for the exact same reason right now that you're saying, man, it's getting expensive to wire, because copper went through the roof.
Yeah.
Right. And so people relied on aluminum instead, and they just wired it with aluminum instead of with copper. And the issue with the aluminum is that it's not as durable as copper. It shrinks and it expands and contracts and so on and so forth. And what it would do is it would eventually work itself loose. The wiring would work itself loose from the breaker. And so whereas instead of having a snug connection there between the wiring and the breaker, it would come loose, and air is a conduit, so electric current can run through that. And so it would essentially cause, in some cases, an arc flash, which is that word that buyers hate to hear.
Yeah.
But it could cause a fire.
Yeah.
And so when people see that and they hear that, that's alarming to them, as it should be. And the issue in that case is, what are you going to do with the aluminum? Because it's going to most of the time require you to rewire it. And so you're going to have to go pull those wires, and you're going to have to rerun copper in, and it's going to be costly, and you probably don't want to pay it. It's unfortunate when the service panel is one of the last things I get to on some inspections, and everything's been great, and the buyers are ecstatic, you know.
You're like, they're like checking in halfway. You're like, good, and you're like, so far, but I'm not done.
That's right. And so I get there, and and there's no easy way. You always try to, well, it looks good, but here's this thing right here. It's got aluminum wiring in it. And some people they'll walk. They will just say, I've dealt with it. I'm not doing it again. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So you've got to gauge what's the response.
Yeah. Is that your favorite thing when you go on an inspection and the buyer just literally is right behind you the whole time?
I do my best. I do my best to not let that happen.
They're like, "What are you seeing there?" You're like, "Could you just give me a minute, please?" Yeah. It's like the doctor who's in surgery, and it's just like, let me do my job, man.
In my earlier days, I would let them. They would follow me, and now I try to say, I'm prone to miss something. Yeah. If you're with me, only because I'm going to feel like I have to engage you in conversation. Yeah. You're going to see me on my phone using tools, right? It's just going to be this awkward silence. But I don't want to miss something for lack of leaving you unengaged. So it's better if I just go do my thing, and then I will walk around with you and answer any questions you got. Because by then, at the end, I probably know the answer to them.
Right, exactly.
You come grab me midway through to go show me something, and I don't know either. I haven't even checked out, what's above that, below that. So
you're like, let me get in the zone.
Let me do it, man.
Do my job.
Let me do my thing.
Awesome.
That's right.
All right, let's talk about plumbing. Goes back to water.
That's right.
Water is the killer of houses, but we have to have it to live, So we got to have water in our houses and our sinks, and
that's right.
clean our toilets and all that kind of stuff. But plumbing specifically issues, what are we looking for? What's your scope? And then you said, what do you ask sometimes a expert to come in and check out further?
The largest concern still here is with the supply lines and then the drain lines. So we can tackle those in turn. On the supply lines, it's where we're at. It's either going to be copper, PEX, or galvanized. If it's galvanized, that's probably where your issue is going to lie. So you know what a copper water line looks like copper. Same thing that the wiring is made out of. PEX is the flexible material that you can kind of bend and mold and shape. Sometimes it's red and blue. The galvanized is going to look silver. And it's going to be an old line, and it's probably going to be corroded at a lot of areas. And the thing I always tell people is regarding this galvanized is that it corrodes from the inside and not from the outside. So sometimes when they'll go do a remodel, they'll cut those pipes because they're going to re-pipe it. They're going to run PEX. And so they'll leave some of the galvanized just laying on the ground, for example. If you ever pick that pipe up and you ever look at it, the diameter has shrunk so much that you would be shocked how water is even getting through that pipe. That's still a significant portion of Mountain Brook at Homewood that has that. That's why when
you want to shower with pressure? Yes or no?
And with clear water, right? Because a lot of the times it's brown and it takes it a long time. You turn the shower on, and if you stood at the back of the shower, you wouldn't get the water because there's not enough pressure because it's having to go through so much buildup just to get there. That's one thing that the buyer needs to be aware of, and a lot of that's going to have to do with how easy is it going to be to fix. If it's a basement home, probably not that bad. If you're on a crawl space and there's no room to get under there, you're going to have trouble getting a plumber to go under there and start to cut all that stuff out and repipe it. And that's going to contribute significantly to your bill when he does it.
Yeah. So you got to get water in, and obviously that buildup's a huge issue. Then you got to get water out.
That's right.
And those pipes can be quite costly. And what some people do not know is you are responsible for everything up to the city line. And so that's typically runs through your yard all the way to the main on the street. And So talk through why that's important to get that inspected, figured out.
So that sewer line and that main drain line is probably one of the most significant things I would say that contributed to our growth back in 2019 or 2018, whenever we started doing sewer lines. I'd moved into this market up here, and a lot of people were concerned with that. One of our founders is a master plumber, so it was an easy add-on for us to be able to start doing that. But I would see people out there scoping the sewer lines, and you talk about there's a good bit of realtors. There's a few home inspectors. There's even less guys who scope sewer lines, right?
Yeah.
Just by nature of what you're doing. Same thing with septic. So when we started offering that helped a lot, because you could make one phone call, and not only could we do the home inspection, we can check the sewer line out too. And by the end of the 3 hours, you know exactly what you're working with.
Right.
That sewer line has the tendency to supersede any of those other things on there. Other than maybe the foundation, in some cases. A lot of the times we still have clay pipes. We still have some iron. You're hoping for PVC. Occasionally you'll run across Orangeburg. But most of the time it's clay, and the issue is that those pipes, they fit together. They connect almost like a Lego in some sense. And over time, grading water, it causes it to shift. And when those pipes shift, they're no longer flush, and now they hold water. Sometimes they allow roots to grow in. Sometimes they back up. I mean, there's just these tendencies to be a nightmare. And because it's your responsibility, it could be, 4 feet underground, and that pipe could run, 20 feet worth of roots, and that's all on you.
Yep. I had a house that when I was initially getting into this and was like looking for a house to basically renovate as a rental. I don't think I was going to flip it. In a really popular area, Glen Iris, would have been a great rental area. But I inspected it, and two things were issues. The foundation, and I mean, this thing was front face, tons of water pressure just hitting the front face of that foundation. And they had put beams in, but it was like leaning still.
Oh, yeah.
The support, like things that
Those steel
anchor
beams.
into this
That's right.
truss. So they were trying to prevent the problem, but the problem wasn't fixed.
Interesting.
And then it was on such a slope, and it actually drained to the back alley. And yeah, I mean, it was a very extreme slope, and it was probably a 35-foot run. And I got a company to quote it, and it was RJ Mechanical, so they're like higher end, nicer and stuff, but they wanted $12K to fix that sewer line.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. That sounds low.
Yeah. Well, this was pre-COVID.
Well, that's why. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
now, I mean, that probably would be a $17,000 to $20,000 job.
People will spend 20 grand easy. Yep,
yeah.
easy.
So, and you can, it's one of those things that you can go out there, get a backhoe, dig it up yourself, and throw in your own PVC, but you will spend days, if not weeks, doing that project. It's a very manual, labor-intensive project. The PVC itself is not that expensive. It's just very, very time-consuming and very expensive to get it going.
We have to we have to bring an excavator out. I mean, we have an excavator just for that purpose right there, to be able to dig down and get to it. And the issue with that clay, or those older lines, is that some people can do a spot repair, but it's almost like it's not worth doing a spot repair because there's so many issues. So by the time you basically puncture that clay, in a lot of the cases, you just need a new sewer line.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got like an area that's an A+, but then everything around you is like a D, you don't want to fix one area, because it's going to be another issue in the future. And then, even though the material is cheap, you still got to have a negative fall. So you've got to be able to shoot the grade and make sure everything is running properly. You will save some money, but man, just to do it right, I would sub it out. I wouldn't do it, man. I would sub it out and let somebody handle it for you.
Well, this has been a great conversation. It's an interesting thing, because sometimes the content, we do on this channel is very like, this is something that someone can pull up 3 years from now.
Yeah.
And just like, if I want to know the 101 of the systems of the house that are going to cost me the most, this is the episode.
That's right.
And that's what I wanted. And, we could dive into how much does it cost to, or like, flooring, and, what is wrong with this, like, window seal and stuff like that. And those things cost money. But these 5 things, man, if you're solid on all of them, or say one of them's off and you go back to the seller and say, hey, this HVAC, I need a new HVAC. Everything else is good. Like, you can paint a house. You can even refinish the flooring.
That's right.
But you cannot necessarily just write a $10K check after you've written your deposit and all these things 3 months down the road. Maybe home warranty is helpful with that, but sometimes they don't come through.
No, not. They usually don't like to either. That's usually not their favorite. No, outside of those 5 things, I always say if I had to add a 6th, I would put the windows, just because if you have a house that needs 25 new windows, I usually tell people they're $500-$600 a piece. Now, it could be depending on the type of window, but they're going to be in the thousands if you've got to replace all of them.
Yeah, plus labor. And, it's funny, my Homewood house, too, it does not have new windows. It's on my docket of list to do, but it's also, like, area-specific a little bit. Like, I can't necessarily throw super cheap windows into my house because, it's a nicer area. The expectation of the type of window that is in that type of house,
that's right,
I would actually devalue my house. So that's something you got to think about too,
absolutely.
A little bit, is with some of these repairs and especially the cosmetic stuff. You really kind of have to gauge, like, the area I'm in. I can't just put, like, super cheap, stuff in certain pockets, because that's not what's in demand for that pocket.
Yeah. You got 25 forward-facing windows that all have to be, custom cut. It's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, this has been super informative. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
I think, like I said, this is like just a breakdown of all these different systems, and knowledge of that is super huge. If someone wants to hire you to go through their house and maybe, check on a system, maybe they currently live there and just are like, man, I'm wanting to kind of see where everything's at, or I'm going to be, buying something soon. I want to have you already lined up. How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so website is sterlinginspectionservices.com. They can just book directly on there. There's a little link they can click. It'll take them. They fill out the information, sends me an email. I'll call, and we'll get the ball rolling, man.
That's awesome.
Then social medias it's just my name, Spencer B. Brothers. Is my Instagram handle. TikTok, I post a lot of TikTok videos on there too.
Yeah, you're a great follow. I learn something new every time I get to see you. You're like, I came across this crazy thing, and it's just like,
it's too much to shoot. Too much stuff that I see to even begin. It's something new. It's something new every single day.
Yeah. It's interesting because I bet you get to see a lot of the jury-rigged, halfway done repairs, and people trying to mend something that's like and I get it. Sometimes people don't have the money and the time to do it what we would consider right, but there's a lot of that out there.
Oh, and flipped houses especially too.
Yeah.
Beautiful interior, but those 5 systems we just talked about right there have been maybe a roof. Yeah, they know that, but that electrical is untouched.
Yeah,
plumbing lines are horrible. HVAC's an 88, and you're like, man.
They didn't actually do the work.
They didn't, no.
Yeah. And not all flippers, it goes back to, not all flippers are equal. And there's some people in this town who have a reputation for their flips, and they sell better and they sell for a higher price because they go through here. This is where the expense is, and that's what they fix. And then in addition to that, they have nice countertops. In addition to that, they fix the drywall. In addition to that, they refinish the floors. But if these aren't right, they're not selling that product. Yeah. And there's a lot of people who think they see HDTV. They don't sit there on HDTV and say, well, we're just rewiring. It's just not, it doesn't make for good TV.
That's right.
When you see a house that looks ugly and then you put up new drywall and paint it and open up a room, that makes good TV.
It does, yeah.
Someone putting wiring in a house and just slowly, methodically wiring each thing and say, oh, we put new wiring in this whole house. That's okay, awesome.
Yeah, it's not sexy.
It don't look good.
That's right, yeah.
And so a lot of times they have this misnomer that is flipping a house, and going through these 5 systems and making sure they're done correctly and doing them right and not halfway doing them, that is flipping a house.
It'll sell it. It'll make my job easier, and it'll make the buyer happy.
Yeah. So, well, I appreciate the time, man.
Absolutely.
I hope you have. I know you got a few inspections today to go to.
I do. Just got them all lined up.
So good luck because it's getting hot out
is.
here in Birmingham. So
Thank you, man.
appreciate
I
the
appreciate
time.
it. You
All
got
right.
it.
Take it easy.
See ya.